Hello, my name is Brenda Schivito, and this is You Are Not Alone. I hold an undergraduate degree in social work and a master's degree in elementary school counseling. I worked in the area of crisis counseling prior to staying home to raise our two sons. Unfortunately, neither of these areas of training could prepare us for the struggles we faced as a family when our younger son, Nick, became addicted to illegal substances, which ultimately led to his death by an accidental overdose on January 20th, 2018. Since his sudden and tragic passing, in June of 2018, the nonprofit to honor his life was founded. Angels Against Addiction, the Lex Remillard Foundation's mission is to raise awareness to substance abuse disorder, reduce the stigma of the disease, and to financially assist those in early recovery. You see, while our son was struggling with addiction, we did feel alone. The shame, stigma, and embarrassment addiction carries in our culture kept us from discussing this with friends and even other family members. We never thought this could happen to us. Sadly, it can happen to anyone. Assistance as to how to deal with this situation was not obvious to us. In this show, we will explore the many areas of addiction and provide you with information and resources that we hope you will find helpful, whether you, a loved one, or friend may be struggling or dealing with addiction. Today's discussion will be asking the question, how do you know? Joining me today to discuss this topic is Lex Remillard. Lex is a trained behavioral health and substance abuse psychotherapist in both residential, outpatient, and intensive inpatient settings. He has over 14 years of experience in the field of substance abuse, including 10 years of clinical experience working with adolescents, young adults, and adults. Lex helps others through empathic motivational interviewing and cognitive behavioral therapy. He is well known in the Chester County area for his non-judgmental, unbiased, and supportive counseling manner. Lex is especially known for his work with, quote, difficult to manage, unquote, adolescents, and has worked closely with area school districts in successfully getting students, quote, back on the right track. Lex was honored by Karen Treatment Centers, receiving the Addiction Specialist of the Year Award in 2011. Thank you so much, Lex, for being here with us today. I especially want to thank you. This is your day off, and thank you for giving up your time so generously to be here.
I'm very honored to be here.
Thanks. Again, the question, how do you know? And I'd like to start with letting our audience know your thoughts about the reasons, particularly our youth. Why do they start with substance use, whether it be vaping, marijuana, alcohol, all these things that are in our society today?
Right. This is a very, very good question. It's such a complex one because there's so many layers to the question. So I think the best way to think about it, we have to start from a macro perspective and then move inward. So I think the first thing we would do is start with society at large. There's a lot of messages that people get, particularly with alcohol, not so much nicotine anymore.
Right.
Like when I was growing up in the 80s,
Right.
like nicotine was still, it was just starting to change with that. But there's a lot of messages that you get from alcohol, both good and bad. And now with the proliferation of medical cannabis and recreational cannabis,
Right.
there's a lot of mixed messages we get.
Exactly.
So that's one thing. The next is really the modeling behavior of the family. There's a lot of people that drink socially. There are quite a few people that drink non-socially, but they kind of, their lives continue. And then there are people in various stages of the addictive disorder. just growing up in a family where drinking is involved puts those people at risk for trying it.
Right.
Now, there's a genetic component to addiction.
Right.
It's not a straight shot for the etiology. Etiology means what is the origin, which is kind of the basis of your question. Some people have the vulnerability, they're born with it. And really the first thing is, well, why does someone choose to try it?
Right.
You right?
Right.
Why does someone choose? Because it has to enter someone's body before they have the reaction.
Right.
Many times it is a common idea is peer pressure. My friends are doing it, and usually that's I know when I was growing up, it was like an older brother, and I was like, oh, okay, and that would kind of be the start. So it's intergenerational.
Sure. Sure.
I think the most important thing when thinking about substance use is that when people use substances, it doesn't really matter which one it is. They do it because it makes them feel different or better, irrespective of the deleterious effects that are behind it. Because that really doesn't matter when you feel better. Now, a lot of people, they use substances, they have a very negative experience.
Sure.
But for certain people, it's like magic. And those are the people that I tend to see. And many people don't understand what's happening to them because of their age.
Sure.
I see adults also that they're kind of stuck in a cycle, and they don't know how to get out because the thing that's helping them is also hurting them.
Right.
And they don't know there's another solution.
Sure. Sure. You mentioned nicotine,
Yes.
which is a really good, interesting point. You know, we seem like we've corralled the cigarettes and the nicotine and the smoking. However, now we have another problem with the vaping. Do you feel as though vaping is a gateway drug?
Well, that's a really good question because science and research has shown that nicotine, it is probably the one chemical that does set the brain up more than any other chemical to an addictive process.
Wow. Wow.
Now, the idea of having a gateway drug is interesting because for many people, there is no gateway drug because they don't have the reaction. Okay. Right? Okay. I've known many people who have tried cocaine, they've actually tried heroin, and they don't become addicted to it. So we also have to think about this in a more realistic fashion. Not everyone who uses these substances become addicted, but a certain percentage will always become addicted. We don't know who those people are until they show up in the judicial system, in my office, in the emergency room. Then it's like, okay, we got to help you. But nicotine does set the brain up. It's also one of the most complex drugs people use. Because in small doses, it acts as a stimulant, and the larger the dose, it acts as a calming agent. So it's very unique.
Right. There's two different things going on there. So getting to our topic for today is, I think mostly for parents, how do you know? How do you know, or what makes you think, or why would you feel as though your child is abusing substances or that they have an addiction or something's happening? How would a parent be able to know or detect what's going on with their child?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is changes in behavior.
Okay.
But it is imperative, especially important in society today, even though we have more connection through electronic devices, that is actually making less connection interpersonally.
Right. Absolutely.
And that's one of the biggest issues.
Okay.
One of the best things families can do is have dinner together. Because you have to see people in their eyes. And sometimes it's harder to see these things the closer you are to someone.
Okay.
When I see people in my office, I see them on a weekly, bi-weekly basis. And I can see dramatic changes in people because I'm not as close. But when you live with someone, the subtle changes that happen in someone's life, sometimes it's hard to see. But behavioral changes, the way someone looks, changes in their finances, drop in grades,
Okay.
change of friends.
Uh-huh.
A lot of the parents, I work with a ton of families, and they'll say, yeah, they started hanging out with a whole bunch of new people. I'm like, okay, let's look at the whole thing.
Sure.
So what it takes, though, is having contact with your child or your loved one
Right.
on an ongoing basis.
Sure.
If that is not happening due to the pace of life, it's going to be harder to see it.
Okay. So when would you say it's a point where families or individuals end up with you? What brings those families to that point? Is it a confrontation with a child? Is it discovering something? How does it usually happen where they end up with you? I'm sure there's a variety of ways.
There's many different ways that people show up in a clinician's office. So one of them is the judicial system, the police. They get caught, something happens, they go to a party, underage drinking, cannabis use, sometimes an overdose, and they're brought to a hospital. Something dramatic happens in a judicial way. Another way is that there is an event at home.
Okay.
Like finding drugs.
Okay.
Or there's no drugs that are really noticeable, but the person's behavior is so dramatically different, it scares them, and it kind of comes out.
Okay, gotcha.
And also school. Oftentimes people start acting very different in school, and it brings to attention, not that there's drugs involved, but that their grades are falling, or that there's things going on in school, and it brings, someone will come into my office, drugs or substance use will not be on the table, but we figure it out real fast.
Okay.
And most of the time, people are not really open. Because I know that I wouldn't be if I was a kid and I was brought into a stranger's office. It would be really difficult to be like, okay, I'm going to be really honest today.
Right.
Because that's just not how things work.
True.
My job is to help discern what is true and what isn't based on my training and my life, and then help someone come to the conclusion that maybe it would be a better idea to be honest for everyone.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah,
Right?
for sure. Honesty.
And that's where
start.
My job is really to build rapport with someone so we can create trust and find a reason for the person to come into my office. Because oftentimes people don't want to change.
Sure.
Because it's doing something for them.
Right.
And we have to figure out a solution to that.
Change is tough.
Change is tough.
Change is tough. And so you do get a certain amount of, obviously, a denial factor.
Absolutely. That's a hallmark of it.
Right.
Now, I do get some people occasionally that are like, I can't do this anymore.
Okay.
And then we have to figure out what are they willing to do to change it. Some people are stuck in I call it like a purgatory of sorts.
Right.
Where it's really not working, but they're terrified to make the changes necessary to actually change it. They can't think themselves out of it.
Gotcha. Okay. So how should parents approach their children? You know, I go into the bedroom, I find marijuana, I find a vaping device. Like, how would a parent approach that child? I mean, how would that, a parent calls you and says, I think my daughter is vaping, or I think that they're smoking marijuana. Lex, how do I do this? What do I do? What do I say? How does this happen?
Well, I think sometimes families or people that I talk to, they think this is somehow different than their normal parenting duties. It's really just being direct with someone saying, this is what I found.
Right.
Why don't you tell me what's going on?
Right.
And just not screaming, just saying, like, we got to figure this out. At that point, it's a choose your own adventure story where someone can either own it or they go into deeper denial and they double down. And at some point, that's when a parent should say, okay, this doesn't make sense. We're going to go talk to a third party. The sooner that you can do that, the better.
Sure.
Because part of the reason I exist is that I am more impartial and objective in the matter. It's really hard to help someone when you love them.
Right.
Because you want them to do better, and our emotions kind of cloud our decision making. So it's good to get a third party in there to say, okay, what's going on?
Right.
Right?
Absolutely. And at what point, I mean, our kids and our youth are being bombarded, like you say, through social media, the, the different things that are out there that they're being bombarded with. At what point should the parents, do you think, talk to their children about drugs and substance? And what age, is there a minimum age? Is there a good age? What would you suggest to parents? How would they approach that? And what would they say? Or at what age, I guess? I'm wondering.
That's a tough one. We have to think about what society is already like showing children, which is quite a bit. More and more and more. Absolutely. So I think at least by 6th grade, 5th grade, I mean, it's really getting earlier all the time.
I know, I agree.
And even if the child doesn't understand like what that means, it is good, like in a story, to have foreshadowing and say, listen, these are things that are going to happen, and you might not understand it right now, but it would be good for us to talk about it. You want to just keep the lines of communication open.
Sure.
Because when those shut down, it gets harder and harder to reach someone. Now, developmentally, children are supposed to rebel and move against their parents' word. It's part of, it's normal learning.
Sure.
And a lot of times people are really upset. It's like, I think you forgot what it used to be like when you were a kid. Now, some people don't rebel very much, but part of it is developmentally normative. So that's coming into play. But the more that you can talk about it and destigmatize it.
Exactly.
Now, it's easier to talk about it if you have a relative or someone in the family that's had issues.
And who hasn't experienced that today?
Many, many families,
unfortunately,
somewhere along the line. Now, the thing with family systems, though, family systems many times, without assistance, any family system, their job is to kind of keep the system together. And sometimes that means denial or just not talking about that uncle or that grandparent and just kind of making it okay. And the truth is always very important in trying to figure out what's happening.
Sure.
And I would just offer that to family members. It's like the truth is good. It's better than a lie.
Sure.
Because eventually the lie will come out.
Interesting about, when do you talk to your child? I recently had a friend tell me that she has a young child. He's maybe 4 or 5. And she had to give him some liquid medication for, maybe it was a Benadryl or whatever, for an allergy that he was having. And of course they make them so juicy and flavorful, grape and cherry. And of course the mother was following the directions as prescribed. And he says, oh, Mommy, can I have some more of my medicine? And she says, no, it's not time yet. We have medication and you have medicine that makes you feel better, but we only have to take it in small doses. So I think that children do absorb things very quickly, and whatever it is that you're telling them, they will believe. And I think the earlier we at least make elementary conversations out of this, I think can be very effective with children. And of course, as we know, the vaping has really targeted our youth. With the flavors.
Absolutely.
And, it's how many, I think I had read 3.5 million high school and middle schoolers are vaping.
Absolutely.
And it's terrible.
It is, it's out of hand.
It really is. It's crazy. But the other thing I wanted to talk to you about is precautions that parents should take. How about medications? What are your thoughts about the medications, the opioids that are being used, the painkillers and whatnot are being prescribed to our youth?
So there's a really good book called Dreamland by Sam Quinones, and it talks about the entire opioid development in America with big pharma as well as the cartels and kind of how this is all developed. Back in the early 90s, there was a time in the early 90s and before that where opioids were really not prescribed unless you had cancer or an end-stage illness, extreme pain. And at some point in the mid-90s, that changed. And then opioids started being prescribed all over the place.
What changed? How did that happen?
Well, it's in the book, but
okay.
from what I recollect is that there was a report that wasn't a substantive report, but it basically changed the tide of opioid prescribers, and then Big Pharma got involved with it, and it led down a really dark path. So, and that research that was shown that kept being republicized has been discredited because it didn't have there was not a lot of common sense attached to it, or science, which is more important. So a lot of the clients I see, you know, there's so many different types of medical procedures you can have where you do not need opioids. Unfortunately, there are many that you do, because opioids do have a medical use. The question is when to use it.
I go into some area high schools and talk to the sophomore health classes about this. And one of the first things I do say, after I talk about vaping, is the opioid prescriptions that are being given out from dentists for the wisdom teeth being extracted. My first thing is, you don't need them.
No.
So many dentists won't even let parents get out the door unless they take this script with them.
I know.
Just in case, in case. But it's, I think it's really doing a disservice and sending the wrong messages to our kids. And even to society at large. I mean, parents, you know, you do what the doctor says, you know, the doctor knows. But I think parents are becoming more educated and more savvy to what's going on with these opioids and how they're being prescribed. And I say, just go with caution.
Absolutely.
Go with caution.
Absolutely.
Sports injuries, the same thing.
Absolutely.
The same thing. I know that, I don't know if you heard this, but over in Jersey, I don't know if it's a law they mandated or it's a policy now, all the athletes playing collegiate or high school sports have to actually go through a workshop. Like they have to go through a presentation.
Should be mandated.
Should be mandated across the country.
That's great.
To explain to these kids, you know, you sprain an ankle, you wrench your back, you do this, you do that. You don't necessarily need opioids to, you know, help you through this little discomfort, because it seems like today in our society people don't want to feel like no pain. There's that pain scale. You know, like, what's the doctor say? What's your pain from a scale of 1 to 10, right? I think that had a lot to do with fueling this opioid prescribing. And I think that you know, that if you got up to a level, my pain is a 7 or 8, well, you're getting, you know, a month's supply of opioids. But I'm hoping that they're scaling back on that. I hope that they're reeling that in a little bit.
Well, they are. I mean, I mean, I just read, or I heard on NPR this week that the state of Oklahoma just received like $400 million. And then another $80 million from another pharmaceutical company, because there's about 2,500 lawsuits out there from municipalities and individuals against this. And so I think that the tide is definitely turning, but right now there's going to be a giant lag time until this thing changes.
Absolutely.
Which is really scary.
It is scary. It's really scary. So what would you say, would you be able to give percentages as to people who are coming to see you for help? Or is it a vast, you know, a big range of different substance addictions?
Yes, definitely. Yep. So I see quite a few people with alcohol. Alcohol, by the way, is the most dangerous drug. And sometimes we don't, there's a lot of misconstrued information just based on, we're in an opiate epidemic, but always alcohol, more people use it, and it has the most deleterious effect on society. Nicotine and alcohol. That's it.
How about that?
And then after that, obviously, opioids. And stimulants. And so there's all these different layers. So I see people from all different areas. Now, I happen to specialize in opioid addiction, so I see a lot of people that are dealing with that because for whatever reason that they got involved with it, many times an injury. Other people, they were experimenting, and it led to that. But they now want to change it, and they want to get off of it.
Right.
And it's not easy.
No. Well, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, or give me your opinion, when it comes to the opioids, I think so much of it being laced with the fentanyl, and because of these sudden and tragic deaths, that there is such a spotlight on it, not to ever discount alcohol as being, you know, a plague also. But I think at the rate that we're losing Americans to these opioids, it's alarming. I mean, over 76,000.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have the numbers from 18? I haven't seen them yet. It was like 28.
It's too many.
Too many. It's
That's
definitely
it.
too many.
It's too many.
Yep, it absolutely is. So
yeah, the problem is the opioid epidemic, and before there was fentanyl, heroin did the same thing. It just wasn't at as high of a rate.
Right.
But now on the street, fentanyl is pretty much all you can get. And it's an economic decision made by the people who sell drugs.
Sure, sure.
It is cheaper, and the profit margin is larger if you sell fentanyl. And that's why it's happening.
Oh, right.
It doesn't make any sense that you would sell someone a drug that would kill them.
Right.
But this is what's
This is
happening.
what's happening.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Philadelphia has the purest and the cheapest on the streets, from what I've understood.
My hope, and this is a governmental concept, but I used to live in New York City, and I saw the Lower East Side change. There was a change in the political structure in New York City.
Right.
A lot of police officers were involved.
Right.
And the Lower East Side and open-air drug selling was almost taken away all the way. Now, granted, it went underground, but the whole neighborhood and everything changed.
Sure.
My hope is that the same thing could happen in Philadelphia.
Right.
Because Kensington is horrific.
It's horrible.
And the residents that live there do not need to live in that squalor.
No.
And people come from all over the country to get drugs there every day. And it just continues.
Right.
It would be wonderful if something could be done about that.
I agree.
My hope is that happens.
That's our hope. Well, it's been wonderful to have you with us today, Lex. It's been a great discussion. And so our viewers could take advantage of your services and be aware of your resources. Where could they access your information, or how would they be able to get in touch with you if perhaps they would like to set up an appointment with you?
So I have a website. It's www.lexremillard.com. I'm also a co-founder of Therapeutic Alliance Centers. So we have a bunch of different therapists that work in, and they're amazing, great people.
Right.
Therapeutic Alliance, there's a website, Therapeutic Alliance Centers. Please visit it.
Okay.
And if you ever need to talk again, I'd be happy to talk to you.
Great.
And if anyone has questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll try to be helpful to you.
It's been great. Thank you so much for being with us today.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks.